The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the human delegation stood up from their seats. Ambassador Sarah Chun, her face a mask of controlled emotion, gathered her papers with deliberate precision. Her colleagues followed suit, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of military training and shared purpose. Chancellor Vextera of the Zelkari Empire leaned forward in his crystalline throne, confusion rippling through his translucent features. Ambassador Chun, surely we can discuss this matter further. The vote was close, merely 612 in favor to 308 against. These things can be reconsidered. Sarah paused at the edge of the speaking platform, her hand resting on the polished rail that had been worn smooth by countless species over the millennia. She turned back to face the assembled representatives of 47 different civilizations, each more ancient and supposedly more wise than humanity. "Chancellor," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite speaking barely above a whisper. "When the Draxery attacked the mining colonies of Kepler, 442, we offered our fleet. You voted it unnecessary. When the plague struck the Outer Rim worlds, we offered our medical technology. You deemed it too primitive. When the trade routes through the Helix Nebula were being raided, we offered our patrol ships. You said our methods were too aggressive." She straightened her jacket, a simple black garment that looked almost primitive compared to the flowing robes and biomechanical suits worn by the other delegates. "Today, when we asked for support in defending our own colonies from the Void Wraiths, you voted that humanity should handle its own problems." The massive Thorgani representative, Warlord Groktar, slammed one of his 4 fists against his stone podium. "The humans are being dramatic as always. The Void Wraiths are merely raiders. Your species has always been overly concerned with minor threats." Sarah's smile was thin and cold. "Minor threats?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, we've always seen threats differently than the rest of you." Minister Ilera of the Ethereal Collective, her form shimmering like contained starlight, floated closer. "Ambassador, please. The Council has always valued humanity's unique perspective. Your species brings a certain vigor to our discussions. Surely we can find a compromise." "Vigor," Sarah repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "Is that what you call it when we've spent the last 50 years trying to convince you that the galaxy is becoming more dangerous? When we've warned about every crisis that has come to pass?" The human delegation had reached the great doors of the chamber. The other ambassadors were rising from their seats, their various vocal appendages creating a cacophony of concern and confusion. This had never happened before. No species had ever simply walked out of the Galactic Council. "Where are you going?" Chancellor Vextera called out, his voice echoing with an authority that had commanded respect for over 3,000 years. "You cannot simply leave. The Council needs time to deliberate, to consider alternatives." Sarah paused at the threshold, her hand on a massive door that had been crafted from the wood of a tree that had grown for 10,000 years on the homeworld of the extinct Villani civilization. Behind her, the other human delegates waited silently, their faces showing no emotion, their postures revealing nothing of their intentions. "Chancellor," she said without turning around, "the Council has had 50 years to deliberate. You considered every alternative except the ones that might actually work." She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting those of the various alien representatives. "Humanity hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, their voices rising in panic and confusion. The Zelkari Chancellor was shouting for order, his crystalline form flashing with bioluminescent stress patterns. The Thorgani warlord was demanding that the humans be forced to stay. The ethereal minister was pleading for calm and rational discussion. Through it all, the human delegation walked calmly through the door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. They moved with the quiet confidence of people who had already made their peace with a difficult decision. In the corridor, Captain Marcus Webb, the military advisor to the delegation, spoke quietly into his communicator. "All human personnel begin immediate evacuation of Council space." Operation Homebound is now active. Ambassador Chun continued walking, her heels clicking against the polished floor that had been crafted by artisans from 12 different worlds. Signal the fleet, Captain. It's time to go home. All of them, Ambassador. Sarah stopped walking and looked out through one of the massive windows that lined the corridor. Outside, the space around the council station was filled with ships from dozens of civilizations. Trade vessels, exploration ships, diplomatic transports, and the occasional military patrol. It was supposed to be a symbol of galactic unity and cooperation. All of them, she confirmed. Every ship, every station, every human presence in council space. We're going home. Behind them, the voices from the chamber were growing louder. The council was trying to understand what had just happened, but they were thinking about it in their usual way, slowly, deliberately, with committees and subcommittees and endless discussion. They didn't understand that humanity had already moved past discussion. The humans had tried cooperation, had tried working within the system, had tried to be good galactic citizens for half a century. They had been tolerated, sometimes appreciated, often dismissed. But now they were leaving, and they were taking with them something the council didn't even realize they had been depending on, the one species that had never learned to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. As the human delegation walked toward their transport ship, Captain Webb glanced at his datapad. The evacuation will take approximately 72 hours to complete. What should I tell the council when they ask when we'll be back? Ambassador Chin stepped aboard the human transport, its clean lines and efficient design a stark contrast to the ornate vessels preferred by the other council races. Tell them we'll be back when they need us. And when will that be? Sarah looked back at the council station one last time, its ancient architecture reaching out into space like the arms of some vast, sleeping creature. Sooner than they think, Captain. Much sooner than they think. The transport doors closed with a soft hiss, and the human delegation departed from the Galactic Council for what they believed might be the last time. They left behind 50 years of careful diplomacy, of patient cooperation, of trying to fit into a system that had been designed by species that thought in terms of centuries and millennia. What they took with them was something far more dangerous. The certainty that they were right, the knowledge that they had tried everything else, and the terrible patience of a species that had learned how to wait for their enemies to make the first move. In the council chamber, the chaos was beginning to settle into confused murmuring. The representatives were looking at each other with expressions of bewilderment, trying to understand what had just happened. They had spent so long thinking of humans as junior partners, as an enthusiastic but ultimately minor species, that they couldn't quite process the idea that those same humans had just walked away from everything. Surely they'll be back, Minister Ilera said, her form flickering with uncertainty. Where else can they go? The Council controls access to the major trade routes, the communication networks, the peacekeeping forces. Chancellor Vexthera settled back into his throne, his crystalline features reflecting the light from the chamber's ancient illumination systems. Perhaps this is for the best. The humans were always difficult. Their proposals were often extreme, their methods unorthodox. The Council functions better with consensus, not constant disruption. But even as he spoke, the Chancellor felt a strange unease growing in his chest. The humans had been right about the Draxery attack, about the plague, about the trade route raids. Their warnings had always seemed alarmist at the time, but they had always proven accurate. And now they were gone, taking their ships and their technology and their strange human insights with them. The galaxy suddenly felt a little larger, a little darker, and a great deal more dangerous than it had just moments before 3 weeks had passed since the human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was beginning to feel their absence in ways both subtle and profound. Trade routes that had been quietly secured by human patrol ships suddenly became vulnerable. Mining operations that had relied on human engineering expertise found themselves facing equipment failures they couldn't resolve. Communication relays maintained by human technicians began developing mysterious glitches. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching as the last human research station in the Andorian sector completed its evacuation. The massive structure, which had spent 15 years studying cosmic phenomena for the benefit of all Council species, was now being systematically dismantled by human engineering teams. Status report, she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years in the United Earth Space Force. 94% of human assets have been evacuated from Council space, reported Commander Liu from his station. The remaining outposts are scheduled for evacuation within the next 48 hours. Vasquez nodded, watching as the research station's solar collectors were detached and loaded onto transport ships. Everything that humanity had built over 5 decades in Council space was being taken down, packed up, and shipped back to human territory. It was the largest logistical operation in human history, and it was being carried out with the kind of precision that only came from extensive military planning. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Council station. Chancellor Vexthera is requesting an immediate conference." "Put it through," Vasquez replied, straightening her uniform. The holographic projector in the center of the bridge flickered to life, revealing the crystalline features of the Zelkari Chancellor. "Admiral Vasquez," the Chancellor began, his voice carrying across the light years with perfect clarity. "I trust you are well. The Council has been concerned about the extent of the human evacuation. Surely this goes beyond what is necessary for a temporary withdrawal." Elena folded her hands behind her back, her expression neutral. "Chancellor, I'm simply following orders. All human personnel and assets are to be relocated to human space. No exceptions. But this includes the research stations, the medical facilities, the educational exchanges," Chancellor Vexthera protested, his form flickering with agitation. "These were collaborative efforts, beneficial to all species involved. Surely these can continue even if formal Council participation is suspended." The Admiral turned to look out the view screen, where the Andorian research station was being systematically taken apart. The massive telescope array that had discovered 17 new civilizations and mapped 38 previously unknown star systems was being carefully disassembled for transport back to human space. "The humans who ran those facilities were volunteers, Chancellor," she said quietly. "They gave their time and expertise freely, hoping to build something greater than the sum of its parts. They believed in the ideals of the Galactic Council. And those ideals remain unchanged," the Chancellor insisted. "The Council still believes in cooperation, in mutual benefit, in working together toward common goals." Elena finally turned back to face the hologram, her dark eyes reflecting years of military experience and hard-won wisdom. "Do they? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the Council believes in cooperation when it's convenient and abandonment when it's difficult." The transmission crackled with interference as the Chancellor's emotional state affected his bioluminescent patterns. "Admiral, surely you understand that the Council cannot simply approve every request that comes before it. We must consider the broader implications, the cost-benefit analysis, the long-term strategic picture." "Understand perfectly," Vasquez replied. "And so do the humans who spent 15 years of their lives building that research station. They understand that when the time came to stand up for them, the Council chose to stand aside." On the view screen, the last components of the research station disappeared into the cargo bay of a human transport ship. In a matter of hours, 15 years of collaborative scientific work had been reduced to carefully labeled containers and data storage units. "Where will you go?" the Chancellor asked, his voice betraying an uncertainty that was rare among the Zelkari leadership. "Human space is relatively small compared to Council territory. You don't have access to the major trade routes, the industrial centers, the established infrastructure." "We'll manage," Elena said simply. "But the costs," Chancellor Vexthera pressed. "The economic impact alone must be staggering. Surely Ambassador Chun and the Earth government understand that this isolation will set human development back by decades." The Admiral's smile was thin and cold. "Chancellor, has anyone on the Council ever actually studied human history?" "Of course we have," the Chancellor replied, though his uncertain tone suggested otherwise. "Humans have a relatively brief but eventful past. Multiple wars, technological advancement, eventual unification under the United Earth government. Then, you know that humans have a particular talent for thriving under pressure," Elena said. "We do our best work when we're alone, when we're outnumbered, when conventional wisdom says we can't possibly succeed." The hologram flickered as the Chancellor's agitation increased. "Admiral, this isolation serves no one. The Void Wraith attacks on human colonies could have been addressed through negotiation, through economic pressure, through diplomatic channels." "Could they?" Elena asked. "Because last I checked, the Void Wraiths don't participate in council sessions. They don't respond to diplomatic notes. They attack, they destroy, they move on. The only thing they understand is force. Violence is not the answer to every problem," Chancellor Vectoros said, his voice taking on the tone of someone reciting a fundamental truth. "No," Elena agreed. "But sometimes it's the only answer that works." The bridge crew worked quietly around them, monitoring the ongoing evacuation with the kind of professional efficiency that had made human space forces legendary throughout the galaxy. They had been preparing for this moment for months, perhaps years, and every aspect of the operation was proceeding exactly according to plan. "Admiral," the Chancellor said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation, "what would it take to convince humanity to reconsider? The Council is prepared to discuss modifications to our decision-making process, perhaps giving humanity a larger voice in security matters." Elena looked at him for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "Chancellor, do you know what the human evacuation is called in our military communications?" "No." "Operation Homebound," she said. "Not Operation Withdrawal. Not Operation Standoff. Homebound. As in, we're going home to prepare for what comes next." "And what comes next?" The Admiral turned back to the view screen, where the last of the human ships were beginning their journey back to human space. "That depends entirely on how quickly the galaxy realizes it needs us. Surely you don't believe that humanity is indispensable to galactic security," the Chancellor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I believe that humanity sees threats differently than the Council species," Elena replied. "We don't wait for consensus when people are dying. We don't form committees to study problems that need immediate solutions. We don't debate the ethics of violence when violence is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos." The transmission began to fade as the communication relay passed beyond optimal range. Chancellor Vextharaz's image flickered and distorted, but his words came through clearly. "What if you're wrong, Admiral? What if the galaxy doesn't need human intervention? What if peace and stability can be maintained through dialogue and cooperation?" Elena's smile was sad, but certain. "Then we'll have been wrong, and the galaxy will be a better place for our absence. But if we're right..." She paused, looking out at the stars that humanity was leaving behind. "If we're right, Chancellor, then you'll know exactly where to find us." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Defiance in relative silence. Around them, the last human presence in the Andorian sector was disappearing into the vast darkness of space, taking with it 50 years of human knowledge, expertise, and protection. "Admiral," Commander Liu said quietly, "long-range sensors are picking up unusual energy signatures near the Helix Nebula trade routes. The same routes that have been experiencing increased raider activity?" "Yes, ma'am. The signatures don't match any known Council ship designs." Elena nodded grimly. "How long until our evacuation is complete?" 26 hours, Admiral. "And how long until those energy signatures reach the main trade routes?" Commander Liu checked his instruments, his face growing pale. "At their current speed, approximately 36 hours." The Admiral stood silently for a moment, watching the stars roll slowly past the view screen. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was settling back into its comfortable patterns of debate and deliberation. They would form committees to study the energy signatures. They would schedule meetings to discuss appropriate responses. They would spend weeks or months deciding on a course of action. By then, it would likely be far too late. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships are to complete evacuation procedures and return to human space with all possible speed. Should we warn the Council about the energy signatures?" Elena considered this for a moment. "Send them the data, but don't expect them to act on it. They've made it clear that they prefer to handle their own problems." As the human fleet began its final journey home, the galaxy grew a little darker and considerably more dangerous. The Council species would have to learn to protect themselves without human help, to solve their own problems without human innovation, to face their enemies without human courage. They would have exactly 36 hours to figure out how the emergency session of the Galactic Council was called at 0347 Standard Galactic Time, when the first distress signals reached the Council station from the Helix Nebula trade routes. The Great Chamber, usually filled with dignified representatives conducting orderly debates, was now a chaos of panicked voices and flashing emergency displays. Minister Keth Mori of the Villian Trade Consortium stood at the central podium, her usually pristine robes torn and stained with something that looked disturbingly like blood. She had escaped from one of the attack convoys just hours earlier, and her testimony was the first direct account of what the galaxy was now facing. "They came out of nowhere," she said, her voice breaking as she addressed the assembled council. "Our sensors detected nothing until they were already among us. Ships unlike anything in our databases, black as space itself, moving without any visible propulsion systems." Chancellor Vextera leaned forward in his crystalline throne, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with stress. "How many ships were lost?" "The entire convoy," Keth Mori replied, her words falling like stones into the silent chamber. 47 cargo vessels, 12 escort ships, over 8,000 crew members, all gone in less than 20 minutes. The Thorgani representative, Warlord Groktar, slammed his massive fist against his podium. "Impossible. The Helix trade routes are among the most heavily defended in the galaxy. The combined escort fleets of 6 different species patrol that sector." "Where were those escort fleets?" demanded Admiral Teshvara of the Carillion Navy, her scales rippling with agitation. "My ships have been requesting reinforcement of those routes for the past 6 months." An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. The truth was that most of those patrol routes had been quietly maintained by human vessels for the past 2 decades. When humanity withdrew from Council space, the patrol schedules had been adjusted, reduced, rationalized for efficiency. Minister Ilera of the Ethereal Collective floated closer to the podium, her form shimmering with concern. "Minister Keth Mori, were you able to identify the attackers? Were these the raiders that have been plaguing the outer systems?" Keth Mori shook her head violently. "These weren't raiders. Raiders take cargo and leave. These things destroyed everything. They didn't board the ships, didn't steal anything. They just obliterated every vessel in the convoy and moved on." The massive display screens around the chamber flickered to life, showing tactical data from the attack. The images were fragmentary, transmitted in the final moments before communication was lost, but they showed ships that defied conventional understanding. The attacking vessels appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating holes in space that the eye could barely track. The energy signatures matched the data that the humans transmitted to us 36 hours ago, reported Chief Analyst Mordun from his technical station. "The same signatures that we chose not to investigate." Chancellor Vextera's crystalline form dimmed noticeably. The Council had received Admiral Vasquez's data transmission and had indeed chosen to form a committee to study the information rather than take immediate action. That committee had been scheduled to present their preliminary findings next week. "How many ships do we have in the Helix sector now?" asked Commander Yulthak of the Rendorian Defense Fleet. 17 patrol vessels, and for defense platforms, Admiral Teshvara replied, checking her tactical display. "It's less than optimal coverage." "Less than optimal?" Volod Gruktar ruarit. "It's practically nothing. Those trade routes used to have constant patrols, overlapping sensor nets, response fleets on standby. What happened to our defenses? The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like a poison cloud. Everyone in the chamber knew what had happened to their defenses, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Finally, Minister Ilera spoke into the silence. Many of those defense assets were human contributions to Council security. When humanity withdrew, we lost significant patrol capability. Then, contact them demanded several voices simultaneously. Request their return, negotiate a new arrangement, offer them whatever they want. Chancellor Vexthera activated his personal communication system, the crystalline matrix of his throne glowing as it connected to the interstellar network. I'm attempting to reach Ambassador Chun at the human embassy. Perhaps we can. The communication system beeped with an automated response. I'm sorry, but the human embassy has been permanently closed. All diplomatic communications should be directed to the United Earth Government on Earth. Then, contact Earth directly, urged Admiral Teshvara. Earth is 12 days away at maximum speed, the Chancellor replied, his voice heavy with the implications. By the time we could even send a message, let alone receive a response. The tactical displays suddenly erupted with new alerts. Multiple energy signatures were appearing throughout Council space, not just in the Helix Nebula, but in 17 different sectors. The attacking force wasn't a single fleet. It was a coordinated assault involving hundreds of vessels. They're everywhere, whispered Chief Analyst Mordun, his tentacles trembling as he processed the incoming data. Long-range sensors are detecting attack fleets moving toward the Carillion mining worlds, the Zelkari research stations, the Velian trade hubs. This isn't a raid, it's an invasion. The Great Chamber erupted in panic. Representatives were shouting orders to their home fleets, demanding immediate evacuation of civilian populations, calling for emergency military mobilization. But the harsh reality was becoming clear to everyone present. The Council's military forces were scattered, undermanned, and completely unprepared for an assault of this scale. How long until they reached the core worlds? Chancellor Vexthera asked, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The fastest attacking fleet will reach Carillion space in 6 hours, Mordun reported. The Zelkari home system in 8 hours. Council Station itself in approximately 14 hours. The chamber fell silent as the magnitude of the crisis became clear. In less than a day, the heart of galactic civilization would be under attack by an enemy they didn't understand, using technology they couldn't counter, with a military force that had been gutted by 50 years of complacency and the sudden loss of human support. We need those human ships, Admiral Teshvara said quietly. Whatever our political differences, whatever votes we made, we need their military support. The humans are 12 days away, Chancellor Vexthera replied. Even if we could reach them, even if they agreed to help, they couldn't possibly arrive in time. Warlord Groktar stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. Then, we fight with what we have. Alert all defense fleets, mobilize the planetary militias, activate every ship that can carry weapons. Against an enemy we know nothing about, Minister Keth Mori asked. We don't know their capabilities, their numbers, their objectives. How do we fight something we can't even see coming? The tactical displays continued to update with grim efficiency. Attack fleets were moving through space with precision that suggested extensive reconnaissance and planning. This wasn't a spontaneous assault. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been months or years in the making. They know our patrol routes, observed Admiral Teshvara, studying the attack patterns. They're avoiding our remaining defense fleets, targeting the gaps in our coverage. This suggests extensive intelligence gathering. How long have they been watching us? Minister Ilera asked, her form flickering with fear. Long enough to know exactly when we'd be most vulnerable, Chancellor Vexthera replied grimly. The irony was bitter and impossible to ignore. The attackers had struck at the precise moment when human forces were no longer available to respond. It was as if they had been waiting for the galaxy to lose its most aggressive defenders before launching their assault. There has to be something we can do, pleaded Minister Kethmori. Some way to contact the humans, to ask for their help. The humans made their position clear, the Chancellor replied. They warned us about threats like this for decades. When we needed their help, we voted to support them. When they needed ours, we voted to abandon them. The tactical displays showed another wave of distress signals. 3 more convoys destroyed, 2 mining stations obliterated, 1 research facility simply gone. The attackers were methodically dismantling the infrastructure of galactic civilization, and there seemed to be nothing the Council could do to stop them. Perhaps, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber, we should consider the possibility that this withdrawal was not random timing. All eyes turned to see Ambassador Koldar of the Nexari Union, an elderly diplomat known for his careful analysis of political situations. He rarely spoke in council sessions, but when he did, his words carried weight. What do you mean? Chancellor Vextera asked. I mean that humanity has always been remarkably well informed about galactic threats, Koldar replied. They warned us about the Draxari expansion 3 months before it began. They predicted the plague outbreak on the Rim world 6 weeks before it spread. They identified the trade route raids 2 months before they escalated. The implication hung in the air like a gathering storm. The chamber fell silent as the representatives began to understand what Ambassador Koldar was suggesting. You think they knew this was coming? Admiral Teshvara asked. I think humanity has intelligence capabilities that far exceed our own, Koldar replied carefully. And I think their withdrawal from council space may have been strategically timed to avoid exactly this situation. The tactical displays continued their grim update cycle. More ships lost, more stations destroyed, more distress signals that would never be answered. And somewhere out there in human space, the species that had warned them about this threat was probably watching the same displays, calculating response times and strategic options with the cold efficiency that had made them such effective allies. And such dangerous enemies, the Carillion home system was burning. Admiral Teshvara stood in the emergency command center on Council Station, watching helplessly as her homeworld fell to the mysterious attackers. The defense fleets had lasted exactly 17 minutes against an enemy that seemed to exist outside the normal laws of physics. Ships that should have been visible on every sensor simply weren't there until they opened fire, and by then it was too late. How many survived the evacuation? She asked, her voice hollow with grief. Preliminary reports suggest 60% of the civilian population reached the evacuation ships, replied Commander Yulthak, though his uncertainty was clear in every word. But we've lost contact with most of the evacuation fleet. The great tactical display that dominated the command center showed a galaxy under siege. Red markers indicated destroyed installations, yellow showed areas under attack, and green showed the few remaining safe zones. The green areas were shrinking by the hour. Chancellor called Chief Analyst Mordun from his station, his tentacles shaking as he processed incoming data. I'm detecting massive energy signatures moving toward the Zelkari home system. The attack fleet, it's enormous. Chancellor Vextera turned from where he had been staring out at the stars, his crystalline features reflecting the red emergency lighting of the command center. How enormous! Over 300 vessels, sir. More than we've seen in any single attack so far. The implications were clear to everyone present. The Zelkari were the technological heart of the galactic community, the builders of the faster-than-light communication network that held civilization together. If their homeworld fell, if their industrial capacity was destroyed, the rest of the galaxy would be isolated and helpless. We have to warn them, insisted Minister Ilera, her ethereal form flickering with desperation. Send every available ship to defend the Zelkari system. With what ships? Admiral Teshvara asked bitterly. We've lost 70% of our combined fleet strength in the last 8 hours. The few vessels we have left are scattered across a dozen systems, and most of them are running low on ammunition. The truth was worse than she was willing to say out loud. The galaxy's military forces had been designed for peacekeeping operations, border disputes, and the occasional raid by disorganized pirates. They had never been intended to fight a real war against a technologically superior enemy, and it showed. There has to be something, pleaded Minister Kethmori. Some weapon system, some defensive technology we haven't tried. We've tried everything, Mordun replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Conventional weapons have no effect on their ships. Energy weapons are absorbed or deflected. Even nuclear devices seem to simply disappear when they get close to enemy vessels. The command center fell silent except for the steady stream of status updates and distress signals coming from across the galaxy. Each new report brought word of another defeat, another world abandoned, another piece of galactic civilization lost to an enemy that seemed unstoppable. "Sir," came a quiet voice from the communication station. "I'm receiving a transmission from outside Council space. It's from the humans." Everyone in the command center turned to stare at the communications officer, a young Rendorian whose scales were pale with stress. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. "Put it through," Chancellor Vexterov finally said. The holographic projector activated, revealing the familiar features of Admiral Elena Vasquez. She was standing on what appeared to be a military bridge, with uniformed humans working efficiently at various stations behind her. "Chancellor," she said without preamble, "we've been monitoring the situation in Council space. We wanted to offer our condolences for the losses you've suffered." "Admiral," the Chancellor replied, his voice carefully controlled, "we would welcome any assistance the human government might be willing to provide." Admiral Vasquez tilted her head slightly. "I'm afraid you may have misunderstood, Chancellor. We're not calling to offer assistance. We're calling to inform you that we'll be entering Council space within the next 6 hours." The command center erupted in confused voices. Admiral Teshvara stepped forward, her expression urgent. "Admiral, that's wonderful news. How many ships are you bringing? What's your tactical plan?" "We're bringing one ship, Admiral," Vasquez replied calmly. "And our tactical plan is to end this war." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Finally, Chancellor Vexterov found his voice. "One ship? Admiral, with all respect, we're facing hundreds of enemy vessels with technology far beyond anything we've encountered. A single ship, even a human ship, cannot possibly—" "Chancellor," Admiral Vasquez interrupted, "how long have humans been members of the Galactic Council?" 53 years, the Chancellor replied, confusion clear in his voice. "And in those 53 years, how many times have you seen our most advanced military vessels?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Chancellor Vexterov thought back through decades of diplomatic meetings, joint military exercises, and collaborative operations. He had seen human patrol ships, human escorts, human transports. But now that he thought about it, he had never actually seen what humanity considered a warship. "You've always used older vessels for council operations," he said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "We've used ships appropriate for peacekeeping operations," Admiral Vasquez corrected. "Ships designed to work alongside council fleets, to operate within council space, to avoid causing our allies any discomfort." Minister Ilera floated closer to the holographic projection. "What are you saying, Admiral?" "I'm saying that humanity has been at peace for the longest period in our species' history," Vasquez replied. 53 years of diplomacy, cooperation, and try to fit into a galactic community that values stability above all else. But peace doesn't mean we stop preparing for war. Admiral Teshvara stared at the human officer with growing realization. "The ship you're bringing, it's not a peacekeeping vessel. The UES Retribution is what we call a dreadnought," Admiral Vasquez explained. "It's been under construction for the past 30 years, incorporating every piece of technology we've developed, every lesson we've learned, every innovation we've discovered during our time in the galaxy." "One ship," Warlord Groktar said skeptically. "Even a dreadnought cannot face hundreds of enemy vessels." Admiral Vasquez's smile was cold and predatory. "Warlord, you've been fighting this enemy for 8 hours. How much do you actually know about them?" "They're technologically advanced," Admiral Teshvara replied. Their ships seem to exist partially outside normal space, which makes them nearly invisible to our sensors and immune to our weapons. Exactly, Vasquez nodded. They exist partially in subspace, using dimensional phasing technology to avoid detection and deflect conventional attacks. It's actually quite clever. The command center fell silent as the implications of her words became clear. You know how their technology works, Chancellor Vexteros said quietly. We've known about dimensional phasing for over 20 years, Admiral Vasquez confirmed. We encountered it during our exploration of the void regions, long before these attackers revealed themselves to the galaxy. We've been studying it, understanding it, and, most importantly, developing countermeasures for it. Chief Analyst Mordun looked up from his instruments, his tentacles trembling with excitement. That's why you warned us about the energy signatures. You knew what they meant. We've been tracking these ships for months, Vasquez confirmed. We knew they were gathering for a major assault on Council space. We tried to warn you, tried to convince you to take defensive measures. And when we voted against supporting humanity's colonies, Chancellor Vexteros said, understanding flooding through him, you realized that the Council would never listen to your warnings in time. We realized that the Council would need to see the threat for themselves before they would take it seriously, Admiral Vasquez corrected. So we withdrew our forces and waited for the inevitable attack. The tactical display suddenly chirped with a new contact. A single ship was entering the Helix Nebula region, moving at speeds that seemed impossible for a vessel of its size. The U.S. Retribution was 3 times larger than the biggest ship in any Council fleet, its hull covered in weapon systems and sensor arrays that defied easy classification. Admiral, came a transmission from the Retribution's bridge. We have multiple targets on approach vectors. Beginning attack run. Good hunting, Captain, Admiral Vasquez replied. Then, she turned back to the Council representatives. You might want to watch this. The tactical display zoomed in on the Helix Nebula, where 17 enemy ships were moving toward the last surviving trade convoy in the sector. The convoy was hopelessly outnumbered, their escort vessels already destroyed, their civilian ships broadcasting desperate distress signals. The U.S. Retribution dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly between the enemy fleet and their targets. For a moment, both forces hung motionless in space, as if neither could quite believe what they were seeing. Then, the human dreadnought opened fire. The weapons that erupted from the Retribution's hull were unlike anything the Council species had ever seen. Instead of conventional energy beams or projectile weapons, the ship fired what appeared to be controlled tears in space itself. The dimensional rifts raced across the void, striking the enemy vessels and simply erasing them. Ships that had been immune to every weapon in the Council arsenal disappeared in flashes of twisted light. The entire enemy fleet, 17 vessels that had seemed invincible just moments before, was destroyed in less than 90 seconds. The command center on Council Station was utterly silent. Everyone stared at the tactical display, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Ow! Admiral Teshvara whispered. Dimensional shear weapons, Admiral Vasquez explained calmly. If your enemy exists partially in subspace, you don't try to fight them in normal space. You fight them in subspace. Chancellor Vextera looked at the human admiral with something approaching awe. How long have you had this technology? Long enough, she replied. The question now is what happens next. Next, Minister Ilera asked. Admiral Vasquez's expression grew serious. Chancellor, the Galactic Council is facing an extinction-level threat. Your military forces are shattered, your infrastructure is crippled, and your enemy is still out there in overwhelming numbers. You need help, and you need it now. Yes, the Chancellor said immediately. We need your help. Anything you want, any terms you require, we'll agree to them. I don't think you understand, Admiral Vasquez said quietly. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't humanity offering to save the Council in exchange for political concessions or territorial gains. She paused, looking directly at each of the assembled representatives. This is humanity doing what we've always done when civilization is threatened by monsters. Which is, we fight them, she said simply. All of them. Until they're all dead. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Outside the station, the stars seemed somehow brighter, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next the war was over in 72 hours. The UES Retribution moved through Council space like a force of nature, appearing wherever the enemy fleet was strongest and systematically dismantling every vessel that had dared to threaten galactic civilization. The dimensional shear weapons that had seemed like magic to the Council species proved devastatingly effective against an enemy that relied on subspace manipulation for survival. But the Retribution was not alone. As the human dreadnought carved through the primary enemy fleet near the Zelkari homeworld, saving the technological heart of the galaxy with minutes to spare, other ships began appearing throughout Council space. Ships that bore human designation codes, but whose designs were completely unknown to the galactic community. The UES Vengeance materialized in the Vailian trade sector, its hull bristling with weapons that seemed to bend light around them. The UES Justice dropped out of faster-than-light travel in Thorgani space, its massive frame dwarfing even the legendary Thorgani battle barges. The UES Reckoning appeared in the Outer Rim territories, where it methodically hunted down every enemy vessel that had been terrorizing the mining colonies. Chancellor Vexthera stood in the Council Station's command center, watching tactical displays that showed a completely transformed strategic situation. Where red markers had indicated enemy-controlled space just days before, green indicators now showed human ships patrolling and securing liberated systems. "How many ships do they have?" he asked quietly. Chief Analyst Mordun's tentacles trembled as he processed the data flowing in from across the galaxy. "Based on sensor contacts and energy signatures, we estimate a fleet of over 400 vessels, sir. All of them appear to be military designs we've never encountered before." 400 ships, Admiral Teshvara repeated, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "Where did they build them? How long have they been preparing for this?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Sarah Chun walked into the command center, flanked by a small security detail of human Marines whose equipment looked far more advanced than anything the Council forces used. Her presence caused an immediate stir among the assembled representatives. "Ambassador," Chancellor Vexthera said, rising from his chair, we owe humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Your fleet saved civilization itself." Sarah nodded politely, but her expression remained neutral. "Chancellor, I'm here to discuss the terms of our return to Council space." "Terms?" Minister Ilera floated closer, her form shimmering with confusion. "Surely there are no terms necessary. Humanity is welcome to resume its place in the Council immediately, with whatever accommodations you require." "That's generous," Sarah replied, "but the situation has changed significantly since we left. The galaxy has seen what happens when humanity is not available to respond to existential threats. I think it's time for an honest conversation about what that means." She activated a portable holographic projector, displaying a star chart of the local galactic region. Red zones marked areas where human ships were still hunting down surviving enemy vessels, while blue zones showed sectors under human protection. "For the past 53 years," Sarah began, "humanity has been junior partners in the Galactic Council. We provided patrol services, research assistance, technological support, and military backup when needed. We did this because we believed in the ideals of galactic cooperation. And those ideals remain unchanged," Chancellor Vexthera insisted. "Do they?" Sarah asked pointedly. "Because 3 weeks ago, when humanity requested support defending our colonies from these same attackers, the Council voted that we should handle our own problems. You were quite comfortable with galactic cooperation when it benefited Council species, but much less enthusiastic when it required sacrifice from them." The uncomfortable truth of her words hung in the air like an accusation. Several representatives looked away, unable to meet her steady gaze. "The fleet that just saved the galaxy," Sarah continued, represents 30 years of human military development. 30 years of preparing for threats that the Council insisted didn't exist. Do you know what we call ships like the Retribution in our military hierarchy? Dreadnoughts, Admiral Teshvar replied. Humanity calls them peacekeepers, Sarah corrected, and the implication sent a chill through the command center. The Retribution and her sister ships were designed specifically to operate in galactic space, to protect civilized systems against external threats. They are not our most powerful vessels. Chancellor Vexthera felt his crystalline structure dim involuntarily. Not your most powerful. The ships you've seen represent our expeditionary fleet, Sarah explained. They're designed for rapid deployment and extended operations away from human space. Our actual battle fleet remains in our home systems, along with defensive installations that make the Retribution look like a patrol boat. Warlord Groktar slammed his fist against his podium, his massive frame radiating frustration. Then, why didn't you use these ships before? Why did you let the galaxy suffer when you had the power to prevent it? Sarah's smile was sad, but understanding. Because every time we suggested that the galaxy needed stronger defenses, the Council voted us down. Every time we warned about external threats, we were told we were being alarmist. Every time we offered military assistance, we were told our methods were too aggressive. She gestured to the tactical display, where human ships continued their systematic patrol of liberated space. The Council created a galaxy where the only acceptable response to aggression was negotiation, where the only permitted solution to conflict was compromise, where violence was considered primitive and barbaric regardless of circumstances. Violence is not the answer to every problem, Minister Ilera said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. No, Sarah agreed, but sometimes it's the only answer that works. The enemy that just attacked you doesn't negotiate. They don't compromise. They exist to destroy civilization and consume resources. The only language they understand is overwhelming force. Chancellor Vexthera stepped forward, his expression desperate. Ambassador, surely we can move past these philosophical differences. The galaxy needs human protection. What do you want in return? Sarah studied him carefully, as if weighing his sincerity against decades of disappointment. What we want, Chancellor, is for the galaxy to acknowledge what just happened here. For the Council to admit that their approach to galactic security was fundamentally flawed. Consider it acknowledged, the Chancellor said immediately. The Council was wrong. Humanity was right. We should have listened to your warnings, should have supported your defensive measures, should have taken the external threats more seriously. And in the future? Sarah pressed. When humanity warns about the next threat, when we request support for defensive operations, when we suggest that the galaxy needs to be prepared for war, the representatives looked at each other uncomfortably. These were the same species that had spent 50 years voting down human proposals as too aggressive, too militaristic, too violent for civilized consideration. Things will be different, Chancellor Vexthera said finally. They will have to be, Sarah replied, because humanity is no longer willing to be junior partners in an organization that treats our expertise as optional and our sacrifice as expendable. She activated another holographic display, this one showing proposed changes to the Council structure. Humanity will return to the Council under the following conditions. First, all matters of galactic security will be subject to human oversight. Second, human military recommendations will be implemented immediately, not debated in committee for months. Third, any species that requests human protection will contribute resources and personnel to collective defense efforts. Those conditions essentially give humanity veto power over Council military policy, Admiral Teshvar observed. Yes, Sarah confirmed without hesitation. Because humanity has demonstrated that we understand galactic threats better than anyone else, and we're willing to sacrifice our people to defend civilization when others won't. The command center fell silent as the representatives considered the implications. What Sarah was proposing was fundamentally different from the Council they had known for millennia. It would transform humanity from junior partners to dominant members, with authority that matched their capability. And if the Council rejects these conditions? Chancellor Vextera asked quietly. Sarah's expression hardened. Then, humanity will continue to patrol our own space, protect our own interests, and leave the Council to handle galactic security with the methods that proved so effective against the recent invasion. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Without human protection, the Council was helpless against external threats. They had learned that lesson in the most painful way possible. There is another option, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. The Council could disband entirely, and the member species could join a new organization structured around actual defense of galactic civilization rather than endless debate about ideal responses to theoretical problems. Minister Keth Mori, who had survived the initial attacks in the Helix Nebula, stepped forward. Ambassador, speaking personally rather than as a Council representative, I would support either option. My people owe their survival to human intervention. If humanity believes the Council structure needs to change, then it should change. One by one, other representatives began voicing their agreement. The Carillion Admiral, whose homeworld had been saved by human ships. The Zelkari Chancellor, whose civilization's technological centers had been preserved by human sacrifice. The Ethereal Minister, whose people had watched their trade routes burn until human forces arrived. They had seen what the galaxy looked like without human protection, and none of them wanted to experience it again. Very well, Chancellor Vextera said finally. The Council accepts your conditions, Ambassador. Humanity will have oversight authority for galactic security, with immediate implementation of military recommendations and mandatory resource sharing for collective defense. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained serious. Understand, Chancellor, that this authority comes with responsibility. Human ships will patrol every system, protect every trade route, and respond to every threat. But we will do so using human methods, human tactics, and human judgment, which means that when we identify a threat to galactic civilization, we will eliminate it immediately and completely, Sarah replied. No negotiations, no warnings, no attempts to find peaceful solutions to problems that require violent answers. She looked around the command center, making eye contact with each representative. The galaxy just learned that there are enemies out there who exist solely to destroy everything we've built. Humanity has been preparing to fight those enemies for decades. Now we have the authority and the resources to do it properly. Through the viewports, they could see human ships moving through space with the confidence of an apex predator. The galaxy was safe again, but it was a different kind of safety than what the Council had known before. It was safety purchased with overwhelming force, maintained through constant vigilance, and guaranteed by a species that had never learned to compromise with evil. The age of peaceful coexistence was over. The age of human hegemony had begun, and the galaxy would be safer for it, even if it was no longer as comfortable as it had once been. The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the human delegation stood up from their seats. Ambassador Sarah Chun, her face a mask of controlled emotion, gathered her papers with deliberate precision. Her colleagues followed suit, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of military training and shared purpose. Chancellor Vextera of the Zelkari Empire leaned forward in his crystalline throne, confusion rippling through his translucent features. Ambassador Chun, surely we can discuss this matter further. The vote was close, merely 612 in favor to 308 against. These things can be reconsidered. Sarah paused at the edge of the speaking platform, her hand resting on the polished rail that had been worn smooth by countless species over the millennia. She turned back to face the assembled representatives of 47 different civilizations, each more ancient and supposedly more wise than humanity. Chancellor, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite speaking barely above a whisper. When the Draxery attacked the mining colonies of Kepler, 442, we offered our fleet. You voted it unnecessary. When the plague struck the Outer Rim worlds, we offered our medical technology. You deemed it too primitive. When the trade routes through the Helix Nebula were being raided, we offered our patrol ships. You said our methods were too aggressive. She straightened her jacket, a simple black garment that looked almost primitive compared to the flowing robes and biomechanical suits worn by the other delegates. Today, when we asked for support in defending our own colonies from the Void Wraiths, you voted that humanity should handle its own problems. The massive Thorgani representative, Warlord Groktar, slammed one of his 4 fists against his stone podium. The humans are being dramatic as always. The Void Wraiths are merely raiders. Your species has always been overly concerned with minor threats. Sarah's smile was thin and cold. Minor threats. She nodded slowly. Yes, we've always seen threats differently than the rest of you. Minister Ilera of the Ethereal Collective, her form shimmering like contained starlight, floated closer. Ambassador, please. The Council has always valued humanity's unique perspective. Your species brings a certain vigor to our discussions. Surely we can find a compromise. Vigor, Sarah repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. Is that what you call it when we've spent the last 50 years trying to convince you that the galaxy is becoming more dangerous? When we've warned about every crisis that has come to pass? The human delegation had reached the great doors of the chamber. The other ambassadors were rising from their seats, their various vocal appendages creating a cacophony of concern and confusion. This had never happened before. No species had ever simply walked out of the Galactic Council. Where are you going? Chancellor Vextera called out, his voice echoing with an authority that had commanded respect for over 3,000 years. You cannot simply leave. The Council needs time to deliberate, to consider alternatives. Sarah paused at the threshold, her hand on the massive door that had been crafted from the wood of a tree that had grown for 10,000 years on the homeworld of the extinct Villani civilization. Behind her, the other human delegates waited silently, their faces showing no emotion, their postures revealing nothing of their intentions. Chancellor, she said without turning around, the Council has had 50 years to deliberate. You've considered every alternative except the ones that might actually work. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting those of the various alien representatives. Humanity hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, their voices rising in panic and confusion. The Zelkari Chancellor was shouting for order, his crystalline form flashing with bioluminescent stress patterns. The Thorgani warlord was demanding that the humans be forced to stay. The ethereal minister was pleading for calm and rational discussion. Through it all, the human delegation walked calmly through the door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. They moved with the quiet confidence of people who had already made their peace with a difficult decision. In the corridor, Captain Marcus Webb, the military advisor to the delegation, spoke quietly into his communicator. All human personnel begin immediate evacuation of Council space. Operation Homebound is now active. Ambassador Chun continued walking, her heels clicking against the polished floor that had been crafted by artisans from 12 different worlds. Signal the fleet, Captain. It's time to go home. All of them, Ambassador. Sarah stopped walking and looked out through one of the massive windows that lined the corridor. Outside, the space around the Council station was filled with ships from dozens of civilizations. Trade vessels, exploration ships, diplomatic transports, and the occasional military patrol. It was supposed to be a symbol of galactic unity and cooperation. All of them, she confirmed. Every ship, every station, every human presence in Council space. We're going home. Behind them, the voices from the chamber were growing louder. The Council was trying to understand what had just happened, but they were thinking about it in their usual way, slowly, deliberately, with committees and subcommittees and endless discussion. They didn't understand that humanity had already moved past discussion. The humans had tried cooperation, had tried working within the system, had tried to be good galactic citizens for half a century. They had been tolerated, sometimes appreciated, often dismissed. But now they were leaving, and they were taking with them something the Council didn't even realize they had been depending on, the one species that had never learned to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. As the human delegation walked toward their transport ship, Captain Webb glanced at his datapad. The evacuation will take approximately 72 hours to complete. What should I tell the Council when they ask when we'll be back? Ambassador Chun stepped aboard the human transport, its clean lines and efficient design a stark contrast to the ornate vessels preferred by the other Council races. Tell them we'll be back when they need us. And when will that be? Sarah looked back at the Council station one last time, its ancient architecture reaching out into space like the arms of some vast, sleeping creature. Sooner than they think, Captain. Much sooner than they think. The transport doors closed with a soft hiss, and the human delegation departed from the Galactic Council for what they believed might be the last time. They left behind 50 years of careful diplomacy, of patient cooperation, of trying to fit into a system that had been designed by species that thought in terms of centuries and millennia. What they took with them was something far more dangerous. The certainty that they were right, the knowledge that they had tried everything else, and the terrible patience of a species that had learned how to wait for their enemies to make the first move. In the council chamber, the chaos was beginning to settle into confused murmuring. The representatives were looking at each other with expressions of bewilderment, trying to understand what had just happened. They had spent so long thinking of humans as junior partners, as an enthusiastic but ultimately minor species, that they couldn't quite process the idea that those same humans had just walked away from everything. Surely they'll be back, Minister Ilera said, her form flickering with uncertainty. Where else can they go? The Council controls access to the major trade routes, the communication networks, the peacekeeping forces. Chancellor Vexteros settled back into his throne, his crystalline features reflecting the light from the chamber's ancient illumination systems. Perhaps this is for the best. The humans were always difficult. Their proposals were often extreme, their methods unorthodox. The Council functions better with consensus, not constant disruption. But even as he spoke, the Chancellor felt a strange unease growing in his chest. The humans had been right about the Draxery attack, about the plague, about the trade route raids. Their warnings had always seemed alarmist at the time, but they had always proven accurate. And now they were gone, taking their ships and their technology and their strange human insights with them. The galaxy suddenly felt a little larger, a little darker, and a great deal more dangerous than it had just moments before.